Settide Newsletter 3: The 5 Dimensions of Photogrammetry Outputs. For the first few years that I was using photogrammetry, it was primarily for conservation and academic research purposes, largely focused on underwater coral reef habitats. I took photos of the corals or coral reef area, created 3D models and imagery, collected data, and maybe helped write a paper for publication or presentation. Then I stored the files on a hard drive or a NAS to never be seen again. As the years went on and the more projects I became involved with, both with coral reefs and in other industries, I started to learn more effective ways to tell a story about my project or task by capitalizing on other offerings from photogrammetry. And many times adding that more component required a minimal amount of additional effort than what I was already doing. So for today, I'm going to share how I have learned to squeeze out much more from a single photogrammetry project, and why only using it for one task, such as gathering measurements, is like leaving 80% of its value on the table. Photogrammetry does more than just measure things. Photogrammetry was primarily developed for gathering measurements from photos, and then from 3D models, point clouds, and imagery. But now gathering measurements, even if it is the initial focus of a project, is only one way to tell the story of your project. From my experiences over the years, the 5 common offerings from photogrammetry are: first, measurements and data; second, visual effects; third, historical archives or records; fourth, education, outreach, or marketing; and fifth, collaboration. Let me share some insights about each one and why they can bring more to your project story. Dimension 1: Measurements and data, the foundation. This is what I consider to be the more common one, and the reason most people start using photogrammetry in the first place. You build a 3D model, point cloud, or imagery to calculate volumes and areas, measure distances, track changes over time, and generate quantitative data for reports and experimental analysis. I start with this one because it has been the most common dimension for me and possibly for you. Your focus might even be how to harvest better data from your models and imagery, similar to what Add Tools for Metashape does in Metashape. This is a great way to use photogrammetry, and as I mentioned earlier, often it is the most common use. Such a cool technology to be able to collect data from a series of photos. Now, the other 4 dimensions can often help tell the numbers of your data in a way sometimes the numbers cannot. You already do all the hard work processing your photos into 3D models and imagery anyways, so now it is more about using those outputs for other uses as well. Dimension 2: Visual effects, the showpiece. From the same photogrammetry project that you gathered measurements and data, you can create high-quality visuals to showcase your work. Photogrammetry outputs such as orthomosaics, or those bird's-eye view maps, point clouds, and 3D models can be used for visualizations in presentations, before and after comparisons, interactive models for websites, fly-through videos, and high-resolution imagery for reports and publications. Creating visuals from photogrammetry is something I am nowhere near perfect at, but I have learned that the details stand out when you showcase your photogrammetry work. For example, crop the 3D model or point cloud to the area of importance you are showing. Remove floating pieces, or blobs as I like to call them, of the model that can be distracting. And especially for those doing underwater photogrammetry, edit the color as best you can to remove the blue-green effects from deeper depths. It makes a huge difference visually, and could even affect the potential quality of your model while processing. You can create many types of visuals from photogrammetry outputs. Here are some of my favorites: video of the model, such as fly-through or spinning around; screenshots of the 3D model, but in different model types like wireframe or textured. And yes, it seems odd to make a 2D capture of a 3D model. Embed the 3D model in an online viewer and share it to allow others to interact with it. And there are many more ideas like side-by-side comparisons, zoomed in, zoom out looks, and so on. For example, you may have collected measurements of a hillside slope before and after a mudslide. The data says, for example, it increased in slope by 7 degrees and lost X amount of volume or something like that. Now angle both DEM images or digital elevation model images of before and after. Take screenshots, put them side by side to show the change in slope. Very simple, but very effective in adding another dimension to your story. Dimension 3, Historical Archives, the Time Capsule. When I was working on a coral reef monitoring project, tracking the reef habitat every 3 to 6 months for a few years, I learned how the photogrammetry outputs, such as orthomosaic imagery, I was producing could have other uses than just for collecting data. One day, someone in another research lab approached me and said, "Hey, I found this rare species of a marine sponge that I think is at one of your reef sites you monitor, and I was wondering if we could look and see if it is in the imagery you collect." I naively thought to myself that this was a bit of a lost cause, but I agreed to help out anyways. So we looked through dozens of orthomosaics, and sure enough, he spotted this bright red sponge on one of them from a few years prior. He said, "Wow, this is great. This shows it has been here for longer than we thought, and we can report it." Another example, and one of my favorites, is how for both my children, I made 3D models of them days after they were born while they were sleeping. Although we have many photos of them over the years, I can go back to those 3D models and see a piece of our family's history. Maybe this is making a 3D model of your childhood home before you leave one last time. Or your grandma's shoes she wore when she was a child almost 100 years ago, now in 3D. And yes, I have those too. They say photos are a snapshot in time. Well, 3D models and imagery are, in my opinion, better snapshots in time, and can bring that object, that place, or that moment back to life in a captivating way. Dimension 4, Outreach in Education or Marketing, the translator. My first thought when I think of using photogrammetry for education, outreach, or marketing is how simply showing a 3D model or an orthomosaic image to someone is a lot better than trying to explain, "So I take a lot of photos and then put those into a software and yeah, they get lost." Similar to using point clouds, 3D models, and imagery as visuals, you can educate and reach more people than sometimes telling them. Another great example is how medical students use 3D models to learn about the human body in ways probably more effective than staring at a textbook page about the cardiovascular system. Now they can spin the heart around and see exactly where the arteries are located and where they circulate blood in 3D space. Very cool. I've been lucky to visit classrooms of students and show them 3D models and imagery projects to teach them either about photogrammetry in general or about the specific object in the 3D model. Now, maybe your project is not focused on teaching people about the property you're measuring or the slopes of a hillside. You may not be trying to reach out to as many people as you can to teach them about, say, aerial drone imagery. But your potential clients may enjoy seeing an example of your work from a similar project. So, make that fly-through video and highlight the similarities of that project to what you can do for them. Educate them on why your work will be beneficial and worthwhile. Helpful tip: when using photogrammetry outputs for education or outreach and marketing purposes, keep the visuals simple and clear. A few simple videos or screenshots of your model in the right context can teach someone very effectively. Sometimes one very large screenshot highlighting a key feature tells more than 4 or 5 screenshots all crammed onto one page and they can't really make out the details. Dimension 5, Collaboration, the force multiplier. This is where photogrammetry really shines for modern project work. Thankfully, to the large amount of other incredible technology available, 3D models and imagery are more shareable than ever. This changes everything about how teams and collaborators can work together. For example, your colleague across the country can explore the same site you surveyed last week. A collaborator can review imagery and work with you on what data they want to collect. Clients can visit the project site from their office. I've worked on projects where most of my collaborators or clients are halfway across the world. Along with making simple visuals for them, sharing the actual 3D model and imagery for them to interact with brings an entirely new level of collaboration. They provide feedback, share their comments on what to do next, or simply say, wow, this is really cool. How to actually use all 5 dimensions. Here's my practical approach for maximizing every photogrammetry capture. First, before the project, ask yourself, beyond measurements or visuals or whichever dimension is your primary focus, how else might these outputs be useful? Who else might need to see this? What story do I need to tell? Second, during processing, create at least one product for each dimension that applies to your project. It doesn't have to be perfect or comprehensive, just something you can use later. And thankfully with photogrammetry, you can go back, reprocess, or edit things to make useful material for the dimension you are working on. Third, after delivery, archive everything properly. Export a few visual products, such as videos or screenshots. Share the 3D model or point cloud with at least one person who wasn't directly involved to observe what they notice that you didn't. The key for all of this is that you already are doing the hard work of capturing and processing the data. Squeezing out these additional dimensions often requires only 10 or 20% more effort for something like 4 times or 400% more value. These are estimates, but I bet they are pretty high. So here's an example from a recent project. I captured a 2-hectare coral reef restoration site. So here's what came from that. First, from measurements and data, I collected coral cover percentages, individual colony sizes, habitat geometry metrics, and other data. Second dimension, visual effects, an orthomosaic and 3D model screenshots for presentations and reports, before-after comparisons for social media, and videos of models spinning around for all of these. Third dimension, historical archive. 3D model, imagery, and photos were stored for future comparison or collaboration and use. Fourth dimension, education and outreach and marketing. The model shared with the university marine biology class studying reef restoration techniques and how to implement photogrammetry. And the fifth dimension, collaboration. Sent the model to restoration practitioners and other project stakeholders who asked great questions and brought up feedback I had not even thought of. Total additional time beyond the initial work for this project? Maybe a few hours. Value gained? A lot more than a spreadsheet with data output. The bottom line, if you're only using photogrammetry for one dimension or use case, then you're leaving a lot of potential value unused. The beautiful thing is that all 5 dimensions mentioned here come from the same capture, the same processing workflow, the same data set. You're not being asked to do 5 separate projects. You're being shown how to get 5 times the value from the work you are already doing. So next time you plan a photogrammetry project, ask yourself, how can I use all 5 dimensions of this capture? Your future self and the project stakeholders, collaborators, and funders will thank you. Ready to learn how to capture, process, and maximize all 5 dimensions of your photogrammetry projects? Check out the Settide courses page to get started. As always, thank you for reading and listening, and I look forward to seeing what you create with photogrammetry today.